Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy for nerds by nerds. I'm Nerdic Steve. Today I'm joined by Bob, World Builder here on the YouTubes. How are you doing today?
I am great. How are you?
Good. So for anyone who doesn't know who you are and aren't familiar with your work, if you want to kind of give them the elevator pitch real quick.
Well, I do a lot of different stuff. That's something I've noticed lately, but it is all D&D focused. Um, yeah, you'll notice that my channel kind of started out with like how-tos of D&D, but then it was like campaign guides, and most recently it was like totally out of the blue was me and my friends trying to, well, me, my fiance, and one of my friends who I play with, uh, trying to test out what some of the mechanics of D&D look like in real life. And that has been really interesting so far.
Yeah, that video blew up. I actually watched that. That's your fiance. I thought that was like one of the students you worked with.
No. Grace and I have been engaged for a little, well, yeah, a little over a year because it was just
Yeah.
like pre-pandemic basically when we got engaged. So that's all kind of on hold right now. But yeah,
Yeah, that happens, man. What are you gonna do? Pandemic.
yeah,
I'm sure no one had that on their bingo card. So
yeah, exactly. But yeah, that video was my first one that I ever saw this like really genuinely big spike on. So that was really
yeah,
exciting.
yeah. I'm sure your channel got a lot of growth out of that.
Yeah, definitely gained, like that was also a big chunk of subscribers just like flooded in all of a sudden.
I don't I don't watch a lot of like D&D YouTube. I've seen some of
Yeah,
your videos, but like when I when I saw that, I'm like, oh, that's different. So I watched that. Just like when I think Jacob did basically the 5 foot square meme video
yeah. Well,
from XP to level 3.
yeah.
So
Well, you talking? Yeah, like it was somewhere recently, maybe like 2 months ago. He had a
yeah.
video that was, yeah, it was like realistic D&D combat, and that was like when that came out. Grace and I had already just talked about like, hey, we should make this video of us like trying out movement speed. Like we were already talking
Yeah.
about that, and then his video came out, and I was like, oh man, I like we got to do this now because
Yeah,
like
yeah.
I was like, oh man, if he does anything like that, I don't know. It probably still would have worked out fine.
It would have. I don't see
But
Jacob
yeah,
running around though, very much.
maybe not. Maybe not.
Uh,
Um, but yeah, we want to expand it to more like parts of the rules and like just yesterday the kind of second one in this like little series came out where we did difficult terrain, uh, and that was actually at like the facility where I work, where there's
yeah.
like wetlands and there's like a little like beach there,
So
like next to the
so do
jet
you make
ski
your
thing.
fiance run through a swamp?
She volunteered.
Just steps out of the water covered in leeches.
That's what there was a number of comments all worried about leeches, but
Yeah.
no leeches. Yeah.
Leeches are real. It's a thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, I remember once when I was a kid, I experienced that, but I had no idea what they were. So I was like foolishly unafraid, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I was with my older sister at the time, and she was like freaking out. We were swimming in a lake, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're not exactly life threatening. Was it
No,
Stand By Me where they get them on their balls or something? And the kid passes out.
I have not seen Stand by Me, but I
It's
would
a little
probably
before
pass
your
out too
time.
if I saw that. Yeah. I mean, the only real danger I think we were in was there was actually like this seems to be a pretty bad summer for ticks. And like with you also being from the Northeast, I'm sure you're somewhat
This
familiar with
summer
Lyme's disease.
this summer
So
is terrible for ticks.
yeah.
Like they are like all over the place, in my backyard. It's just like
Yeah.
I just had one on the dog. Like I was kissing the dog's face. My wife's like, "What is on her nose?" I'm like, "What are you
Oh
talking about?" And
no.
she's like, she's probably a good like 5-10 feet away from me. I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And then there was
She
like
saw it from that far away.
yeah, she
Wow.
saw it crawling on her nose. I'm like, "How'd you see that?" Like, you take your glasses off to look at your phone. How the hell did you see that?
Yeah.
And sure enough, there was a tick crawling on her. Now, I don't know if the tick was on her or the tick came from me and crawled
Oh,
onto
and got
her.
on the dog.
But because we give him the stuff, it wasn't attached though, so
Yeah.
or it'd be
Well, that's
dead.
good. Yeah, if it was just crawling. Because
Yeah.
I don't know. I actually had Lyme's disease well, not a few, it was like probably 7 or 8 years ago now. And
Had
it's
I don't think you got rid
yeah,
of it
well,
once you
yeah,
got it.
technically, yeah, I think it's something that's like in your body forever.
Uh,
But like took the antibiotics and stuff, so hopefully won't ever develop, whatever like chronic Lyme disease actually is down the line. Um, but yeah, it's basically like a week of just feeling like really sore all the time and kind of flu-like.
yeah,
It was I got it because I was exposed to a ton of ticks this one summer when I was doing like field work as part of my like environmental degree stuff like way back. So I just thought I was like
I went to
exhausted
college.
and
All I got was
dehydrated,
this stupid Lyme's disease.
basically. I mean, like, did you go to college?
I did not.
Okay. Yeah, that's like neither of my parents did. Um, but yeah, that's like
Watch
a
it, buddy.
joke in
Watch
my
it.
head now where, like, oh man, they grew, like, I grew up with totally that message. And I know a lot of like people my age probably say this nowadays of how it's like, yeah, it's like you go to college, get that sweet job. And now like, I work at a nonprofit during the day, so most of my income now is actually coming from World Builder stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Not really using my degree at all, except for I guess these recent outdoors videos. But yeah,
I mean, unfortunately, that's pretty common. I mean,
yeah,
my daughter probably won't go to college. She'll probably go to she wants to do makeup and hair and stuff. So she'll go to like a
yeah,
tech
that's
school.
awesome.
My son is going to Rowan. Um, he's a physics major, and he had actually like
Cool,
Rowan had like an engineering program
nice.
through his high school, which I don't think he scored high enough to get into their
Okay,
engineering program. So he's like backdooring through the physics major. So
okay,
like I didn't mind so much because I felt like he was going for something that was more specific and focused. But like,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, I feel bad for kids today because they get this messaging: go to school, go to school. They get the
yeah,
generic degree, and it's like, great, now you can be a manager at McDonald's.
yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean,
and also here's $80,000 you need to pay off.
yeah, no kidding. Yeah, I mean, I think that's like I was very lucky in that like I had the like good enough grades to get into where I was going, which is a pretty good school. But B, my mom had worked there part time for many, many years. And then a few years before my older sister was like ready to go to college as well and wanted to go there, she was able to get a full time job there, which then came with benefits. So like our tuition was vastly lower than
Yeah,
like most of the other students who went there.
nice.
So yeah, so in that respect, I think I made out fortunately a lot better than a lot of folks in my generation. But
So,
yeah,
how did you start YouTubing? What was the kind of the impetus for that?
that I've like thought about this a lot of times because it's something I like talk about with people from now and then. But it was kind of a mix of things like like just being obsessed with D&D for a few years and like wanting to do more with it. But really, I think it was like I wanted to write adventures, and because I had just kind of learned about the DM's Guild and wanted to just like publish a lot of my homebrew and particularly like world building stuff. And then I realized like, okay, DM's Guild one isn't really the best place for stuff that isn't like Forgotten Realms or whatever.
Yeah,
But two, like yeah, I can publish stuff here, but I have no like who's gonna see it. So for me, like starting a YouTube channel was partly along the lines of wanting to establish just an audience that I could then be like, oh hey, and I made this thing. So like that was really the idea to like do both. Um, but yeah, because I wanted to do video for a long time. Like that's always been like a little like background thing in my life. Not that I have any like expertise or training with it whatsoever, but just like me and my friends always making like stupid videos over the years. So yeah,
well, I feel like yourself and a lot of the younger YouTubers coming up, you guys are so much better at it than we are because like we had to like learn everything where you guys kind of like through osmosis absorb the platform.
that's a great point. Like, because when I was in middle school when YouTube began, right? So like, and it's actually funny because there are like some people who I work with that are only a few years younger than me
Yeah.
that have never really like watched a video on the internet that wasn't like from YouTube. But I grew up still with like there were funny videos on these other sites that now no one remembers.
Like Vines? Are we speaking of
No,
Vines?
not even Vine. Like there's like E-Bombs World, um, like Albino Black Sheep was one of these sites. Like it's just like other like goofy video, like whatever things before like memes were even really like called memes. And but yeah, like I'm kind of the last. Like I still grew up with the internet to some extent. Like I probably got that around the same time YouTube became a thing. But yeah, and we weren't posting videos on it, but we were
Did
still like watching funny videos and then just trying to make them ourselves.
did you watch TV at all, or did you just like
Oh no,
a
yeah, I was
phone?
still a major like SpongeBob. I grew up on SpongeBob,
Okay.
Doug, like a lot of Nickelodeon, Cartoon Network, and stuff. Totally.
Because like my kids,
Yeah.
when they were really little, they watched TV. But after they hit a certain point, like as soon as they got their own phones,
Yeah.
that was it. They never watch TV anymore. That isn't like something that's being streamed. Like a couple years back, we kind of like cut the cord, and I feel like like my youngest brother, is probably like the beginning is just between like like I'm firmly a Gen Xer and he's probably like millennial, and I feel like the millennials they don't pay for cable anymore. They don't have landlines, right?
Yeah.
And like Gen X is like the split where some of us do and some of us don't.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I still grew up with all that. Like I got a cell phone when I was in 8th grade, but it was very much like when I was in that last year of middle school and then all through high school, it was like that phone has to be off and like in your locker.
Yeah.
But now it's totally different because one, you can do anything you want on a phone.
Yeah.
But two, it's like schools don't even try to like do that anymore. Like they just let kids be on their phones, and that blows me away because it totally is a distraction. Like you cannot argue against that, even though every kid will. But
I know, like my daughter would be on her Zoom classes. I'm like, why are you on your phone? You're supposed to be a teacher.
Yeah, well, virtual learning is a whole other thing. But yeah, so like how old were your kids when they got? Oh yeah, well that was the end of my point. Was like I didn't actually get a smartphone until I was in college. Like I was like one of my last friend. Actually, I was like my last friend like group person to upgrade from like flip phone to a smartphone. But yeah, I was gonna ask like how old were your kids when they?
I think high school and junior high.
Okay.
That we finally like broke down and got them phones.
Yeah.
I was very resistant. I'm like, do you know how old I was when I first got my first cell phone? Literally, mom was pregnant with you, and that's the reason we got cell phones. So.
Yeah. I mean, and that was always like the argument for it was like, oh, well, now, it's like, it's just for emergencies, like whatever. And it's funny too, because now that I like work with kids and at least in our old program, we would always, at the beginning of the week, because kids would like, for those who are totally unfamiliar, I'm an outdoor educator. I work at a facility where at least pre-pandemic and now hopefully this coming school year, we're getting back to this more. But kids would come to our camp, stay for 5 days at a time, sometimes 3 days, but usually 5. And on Monday when they arrive, we'd like show them their like cabin where they're going to stay and whatever. And one of the first things we do is collect all their phones, and we just like put them in this little like safe thing that's in their room, but only the chaperone like and us like would have that code like to actually get to the cell phones, and they would get to use them at night and stuff. But like the first thing every kid says is like, well, what if I need to call my mom? It's like, even though they just want it to like text their friends and go on Instagram.
Yeah. I mean, like when I was a kid, literally like how you knew it was dinner time? Like your parents would scream out the back door. Except for like this one family, the LaRosas, their parents had a bell out there that they would ring. And they definitely got teased for that.
That's their like the triangle, like yeah.
So it's like, listen, you little punk, I know you can do without a phone, for the day.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is they end up loving it. Like they have a great time when we're out there doing stuff. But there's a lot of resistance at first. Sometimes, like not every kid.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, I mean, eventually that won't be a problem because like you're just gonna need kill codes to turn off the chips in our brains.
I'm almost excited for that day because then I won't have to carry around a phone. But
Well, and
yeah,
it's funny, like the phones got smaller and smaller, and then they're starting to get bigger and bigger again
yeah, yeah,
as we do
yeah.
more things with them, as we need them for like for the screen.
Yeah, I remember one of my friends in middle school had a flip phone. I don't remember what like
Yeah,
make it was, but it was like when it was folded, it was like this big. Like
yeah,
it was
yeah.
like a tiny little thing. Not quite like, like the Zoolander
Yeah,
phones.
and
Like
then people realized they could watch porn on their phone, and like we need a much bigger screen.
that changed the game.
Change the game. No, like Ted took a long time before he got a cell phone. Matter of fact, he didn't get a
Yeah.
cell phone until he got a company phone.
Oh wow.
And like he like had a phone, but they would like lose their cell phones because they didn't use them.
Yeah.
And my daughter, I was like, Ted has like an old phone, and she's like a flip phone, and I was like, no, it's not even a flip phone. It's just like it's like a brick.
Oh yeah. Wow.
Block.
Yeah.
Like one of the old Nokias.
Or yeah, the indestructible phones.
Yeah, but you can do anything to those things, and they would keep working.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, and I'm still like unique among a lot of my friends and stuff in that I have my very first smartphone still. So this thing is like 6 or 7 years old. It's an iPhone 5. And I have like the OtterBox case.
yeah,
So it's, I've dropped it a handful of times, but no damage.
the
Still going strong.
otter boxes are no joke. Like I used to work in construction, so like I always made sure I got an otter box because I've gone through a couple phones.
Yeah.
I'd always have to make sure I had the insurance. I froze a phone. I plowed a phone. I ran a phone
Like-
over with a
like
dump truck.
Plowed a phone, like dropped it, and then ended up.
Getting plowed in the snow, yeah,
Oh,
because
man.
I did heavy construction, but in the wintertime we do snow removal.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I was kind of brutal on phones, so I always need. I got on the plus side, like I got a really good use out of the insurance.
Sure. Yeah, that's a
So-
good point. Most of the time, insurance is just a scam. But yeah.
Like actually, it's hard to get insurance now. I don't even like, and with some phones they won't even sell it to you.
Yeah.
And I think I'm the reason. Like people like me, we
Well,
ruined it
it's
for
funny,
everyone.
like, my friend Steven, who's in some of my stuff on my channel, he like occasionally is just one of these people who either doesn't take good care of it or doesn't like use the case enough or something.
Yeah.
So he's always got phone problems. But recently something went wrong with his phone, and he actually had some kind of like I don't know, he wasn't good at explaining it, but for whatever reason they didn't like really make do, or there was some kind of deductible that he didn't know about, so he still had to like pay a bunch out of pocket to like fix this phone,
Yeah.
even though he had like whatever the insurance was for it. So yeah.
So you people thought we were going to be talking about D&D, didn't you?
Hey, D&D's pretty much almost over our phones now.
yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
So I guess we were talking about you got started on YouTube because you wanted to make things for
Yeah.
like the DMs Guild or whatever, and then you realize it's like, well, there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
How do I get people to know who I am?
Yeah.
So
And
have you evolved since then, like as your line of thinking evolved, or is
Yeah,
it still the
100%.
same goal?
Yeah, no, it's pretty much became like once I started a Patreon, that was where I then like post my original content pretty much. And actually this summer, one of my like to-do list things while I have, some time off from my regular like work is to post some of those like these supplements, adventures, whatever that I've made just on my Patreon, post them on Drive Through RPG,
Mhm.
because there you can have it in multiple locations, I guess, like published in more than one place. Anything that's on DM's Guild can only be on DM's Guild. That's part
Yeah,
of
that is
their,
kind of
like, terms.
problematic.
Yeah. So yeah. But
Also,
so I'm
people
hoping
can
that-
use your stuff too. Like if it's on the
technically.
if it's on the DMs Guild, like I've seen people just compile other things on the DMs Guild and
Really?
then like repackage them and sell them.
Yeah, I mean, I remember one time, this was over a year ago, it was when I was like pretty new to this stuff still, someone reached out to me about one of these supplements that I have on there, which was just like a couple like bird folk races,
Yeah.
and said like, oh, I want to use this in a collection of races, like you'll be given like whatever percentage of, like counted as a writer. And I don't know if anything ever happened with that. I remember I followed up with them once, but like for all I know, they ended up publishing it and then like didn't even include me.
They're a D&D millionaire as we speak. You never got your royalties.
Yeah.
So Rivers RPG wants to know how old were you when you started D&D?
So I only started playing D&D in 2015. So so math, I was 20 in 2013. So yeah, I was only 22 when I started playing D&D. And that was, as some of my viewers may know if they're watching, was a very, very homebrew mix mash of 3.5, because we used character sheets from 3.5 and 3E because we didn't know there was a difference. And like we were just like Googling like D&D character sheet. Okay, print. And our DM, who was the only one of us who really had any experience as a player before that, had the 5e player's handbook. So basically we just made a lot up and didn't really realize we weren't playing D&D, but it was so fun.
I mean, it seems like you're playing several D&Ds all at once.
Yeah. Like most of our abilities and everything were homebrew for sure.
How did that come about? Because it sounds very haphazard.
Well, I mean, it was literally like one day, one of my friend who was the DM just like asked myself and a couple of our other friends, and we were all hanging out like, hey, do you guys want to play Dungeons and Dragons? And my only exposure to D&D up until then was seeing, there'd be like a couple scenes here and there in like different cartoon shows or just other like sitcoms and stuff on TV, where it's always like the characters, either like the super nerdy characters or the characters all just like dressed up, acting as nerdy as they possibly could. So when he said that, I was like, what? Like, no, like I consider myself kind of a nerd, but I don't think I'm that nerdy.
Right,
like,
I don't think I can play costume or anything.
Yeah. Like I really had no idea really what it was, but I was very into fantasy. Like I've always been into, like, Lord of the Rings was like a big thing growing up, mostly because my dad is a big hunter. So I've always like done archery throughout my life, like less so as an adult living on my own, but I've always then been drawn to like characters in fantasy media that like use a bow and stuff. So that's exactly like what my first character did. But D&D, I had like no reference point to when I started, and slowly just kind of gradually like went out of my way to learn more of the rules. Like the more I got invested in it, like I was the player who was like, okay, so like when can everyone play next? Like not the DM, like that was me like trying to get everyone to keep playing. Because I was just so into it.
When did you realize that you're like using different editions?
Oh man, that's a great point.
Did you guys have like an epiphany, or did you know all along?
No, I think it was at some point so our characters in that campaign ended up getting to level like 15 or 16. And along the way, I realized like, okay, like, I'm not using like half of the skills on this sheet. Because again, we were using, like, I had like a 3.5 sheet, I think, but we were mostly using like 5e rules. So I was like, I'm not using like most of these skills. I want to try to make a character sheet that's just a little more simple. Like
right. When am I going to use Spotless or use rope?
yeah, exactly. There were so many, like, I think like climb was just like its own skill that we never used. And so my character sheet was like kind of like ratty at that point, like a lot of hit points lost and regained. So you're like digging a hole in that part of your character sheet. So I wanted a new one. And then when I looked up like D&D character sheets, I found all these different ones. So I was like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be using. And then I think that was kind of the tipping point of when I was like, okay, wait, I need to learn more about this game.
You finally found the sheet that matches the game you're playing. The game's very versatile. Also, you would have had like fortitude, reflex, and will saves on your character sheet, and not the stats.
Yeah. And they were all, there were a few different armor classes. You had like flat-footed
touch. And
like didn't use that stuff. And like, well, there were, I don't know, it was like very just like an as needed basis. Like we'd be like, okay, wait, am I flat-footed right now? Or like, yeah, we just made it up.
When you finally like saw there were different character sheets and realized there was different versions of the game, was it like, oh wait a minute, and then you had that epiphany, that's why?
Yeah, but again, it was pretty much like just me, because like out of the whole group, I think even compared to my DM at the time, I was like most interested in like really wrapping my head around the game. Like, and at the same time, I still like, and then I don't know, I talked about this in a video not too long ago, how only in the last couple months I've realized like I need to like dig my head out of the rules and really kind of get back into the mindset of just really having fun and just like being in the moment in the game instead of thinking about how it's supposed to be. Because then that's like what developed for me like over a slow period of time. And yeah, now just more recently realizing like that's not like what I really loved about the game in the beginning. Like
Yeah.
that's part, like the rules are part of what drew me in and like made me more interested in it, like being very strategic and everything. Um, but yeah, definitely the fun part of the game was the ridiculous stuff that our characters did because they were way overpowered and our DM had no idea what he was doing. And that's what I want to like recapture in my games.
Well, I mean, it kind of speaks to like the genre of RPGs in the game itself. Is like,
Yeah,
it can be whatever you want it to be,
exactly.
even if you don't know what it's supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
You can just jump in and play. Have you, Rivers RPG wants to know, have you gone back and tried the older editions?
Yeah, so I guess fairly early on, once like after I had met Grace at this point, which by the way, I should mention, like on our first date, she like casually mentioned D&D, and I was like, and that was, I feel like a turning point in our relationship for sure. I was like, okay, this is something big. But anyway, she got her hands on all the 3.5 core rule books.
Yeah.
And so she wanted to DM and like studied those. So we did actually then, even after I had like had a better handle on 5e, we did play like a 3.5 campaign for, I don't know, at least a couple months, I think. But then after that ended, I've pretty much just been in 5e since.
There's no reason to go back.
Yeah.
I think been through them all. I don't think there's any reason to go back.
Yeah. Well, and that's, something I was thinking about before this chat was like, and I would kind of like your answer. Like if you're comfortable, how old were you when you started playing D&D? Because I know I've heard you say in other chats that you've been through kind of all the editions, but
yeah. So, I mean, I was probably in my early teens when I really started playing, but
yeah,
I was first exposed to the RPGs. Like I was really young, like, I don't know, 5 to 7-ish, wow. and it was so like,
did you have like family members who played?
No, like one of there was a kid that lived across the street from me who was 2 years older than me. And he brought over the red box. And I remember we had this really old ass couch with like this cranberry velvet red couch. It looked like something from the 70s.
Yeah.
Which makes sense because it probably was. I mean, I was born in 75. So, and him pulling out the red box and, the iconic, art on the cover with the red dragon and the warrior. And then like, we'd actually play. We did end up like connecting with some of his friends and playing like a session or two of Gamma World.
Okay.
And which was a different TSR game.
Yeah.
And then like, I wouldn't touch that stuff for several years later when, again, one of the older kids in the neighborhood would, he had a sister that was our age. And, he would play like wiffle ball and run the bases and stuff with us. And one summer he's like, hey, there's this game. Do you guys want to play? And so like he recruited all like the younger neighborhood kids and started running for us.
Cool.
Yeah. And been hooked ever since.
Yeah. But yeah. And then what you said about like seeing, like basically you getting this experience of like seeing the game really evolve and like you adapting to each edition. Like that's something that I'm like excited for in my future. Because like I know it could still be a long time, but eventually they will make another edition. and it'll just be so interesting to see like how the game ends up changing, and like will I want to stay stuck in 5e, like will I prefer that, or will the new thing just be awesome? Like I'm really excited to see how it ends up changing in the future.
Yeah, I think if we see any like really big shakeups in the design team, then we're gonna know like, oh, here comes a new edition.
Yeah,
Yeah, like, and that's not like because I know they've been talking about a new edition for years,
yeah,
but you know, it's always a matter of like trying to figure out when's the right time to implement one. You
yeah,
know, because you know, going from third to fourth, they had a lot of backlash and create cause a huge
yeah.
schism in the community.
Yeah. Well, that was the rise of Pathfinder, right? Because
Yeah.
people were like, "Nah, we want more of what it was." Yeah.
So Mixon wants to know if you have any suggestions for writer's block mid-campaign of an entirely homebrew world. I fear rushing or forcing half-thought-out ideas and making lame story for the players.
Oof. I think as long as you are passionate about that half thought out idea, like just put it in there, because you never know what the players are going to latch onto. You know, maybe that it just won't be a big hook for them, and then you'll use a different half thought out idea. But I'm definitely have been getting more into like I don't want to have full thought out ideas when I come to the table as a DM. Like
Yeah.
I want it to unfold like in the game now.
I just like, I mean, I think the key is to have a lot of half-thought-out ideas
Yeah, yeah,
and
exactly.
like throw them out there and see what your players, you know, kind of um, latch onto and go with that.
Yeah,
If you
yeah.
only come up with one, there's a good chance that they're not going to be into it, or you know, or you need to like really base it off of what the characters are doing in the game or the backstories
Hmm.
they came up with. Um, is is what I find. Like, if you need to make it about them,
Oh yeah.
and they're just so much more likely to latch on, and then you know, and then like don't be afraid to change things. Like if it goes in a different direction.
Yeah. And that's funny. It's reminding me of something else I've heard you say a few times, how you and Ted like pretty much do not play published campaign books. And I love
Yeah,
that. Because like then you just get to make it about the characters, like entirely almost. Like it's going to be about the world and about them, but ideally then their characters are better rooted in that world than they could be really like in the Forgotten Realms. Cause I don't know. I just feel like it's more natural to play it that way.
well, what about you? Would you use official stuff, or you like to mainly use homebrew stuff?
Well, yeah. So for as long as I've had the channel, we've pretty much, well, I don't know, it's been about half and half, like
Okay.
homebrew and official. But yeah, because early on, again, like my first campaign as a player, 100% homebrew. Um, my first campaign as a DM, well, my first campaign as a DM was fairly short. That was all homebrew. Because again, like another thing that really drew me into the game was like I wanted to make my own world and then have my players playing it, you know. Um, but then when I really got more serious about DMing, it was like homebrew setting, but I had a bunch of like small modules from Goodman Games, if you're
Mm-hmm.
familiar with them. Yeah, like they have a series of 5e like one shots basically for different levels. So I kind of like used them as different hooks and things. But most of the prep was done, and I really like that style, honestly, like a publication. Like I like a module a lot better than a whole campaign book now. But that being said, I have been running Rime of the Frost Maiden for almost, well, I guess it'll be a year in like October. So like a year and a half of Frost Maiden. And I don't know if we're gonna like get to the final chapters, because there's kind of a point where you can fight the Frost Maiden like for kind of early. Like that's written into the book,
Yeah.
and my players are getting close to that point. So depending on how that goes, like I don't know if we're really gonna like use half of the material that's in here really, because we I don't know. It's a big book. This that one's a pretty unique example as far as like the modules go, I think. But that's the main one that I've done besides the Essentials kit. I have others on my shelf, but I haven't played out of them.
Yeah, I mean
Haven't
we're the
DM'd
same.
out
We
of them.
like
Yeah.
own them all.
Yeah.
We just don't run them. Also, it's a huge commitment, right? Like
Oh
the
yeah.
amount of time it takes to run through a single adventure.
Yeah.
Like,
Like the amount of work to like study the whole thing and set it up, and yeah, try to get all your players on board for that, when again then you're going to have to kind of do these workarounds to get the story to be about their characters unless like they really make a character that just happens to fit super well with the story, I guess. I don't know. I think it's easier to start from scratch.
I can think of like 4 modules or adventures
Yeah.
that DMs have used, and I don't think we ever completed any of them. Right? Like we do like bits and pieces of them. Like there was
Well, they're
Hamlet.
so long. Yeah.
Well, even the older ones, it was like Hamlet, Temple of Elemental Evil, Tomb of
By Hamlet, do
Horrors.
you mean Village of Hamlet?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that long? I thought that was
No,
like
it's not. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Like even even the shorter ones, in my experience, we just never really gone through them. And like this is someone else DMing them, because when I started running games, I did all homebrew, so it's like most of that stuff didn't come up. I think there was another one, something to do with Daggerford from Forgotten Realms, and we just didn't like. It wasn't until like this past year that I played in a Curse of Strahd game someone ran, and we've actually like did the whole adventure.
Wow. Well, I don't know. I haven't played Strahd or run it yet, but I hear such great things about it, and I think that is probably one of the, if not like the best written. Again, having no personal experience with it, I just feel like I've heard so many good stories about how some people even use like fighting Strahd as like a one shot. Like I think Mike Shea from Sly Flourish does that for like Halloween, where he just like runs Curse of Strahd in like one long session, basically.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's adaptable like that just really speaks to how good that module must be.
I feel like there's a DM's Guild product, and it's like that does that, and it's like one night, Strahd in one night or something. I don't know. It's like kind of like a humorous.
There's a lot of good Strahd stuff about, a lot of good DM's Guild stuff about Strahd, because I know there's at least 1 or 2 writers there who are like pretty big in the community and love Curse of Strahd. So there's some good products for that for sure.
Under Illifarm, that's the adventure that happened in Daggerford. And again, I still don't think we even did that whole adventure. So like, yeah. So our experience with published adventures has not been good.
So then, do you guys play in like when you're DMing? Do you have your own world, your own setting that you use, and Ted has another one? How's that work?
We've been using the same one. I mean, so we used to run in a world called Ulfgania, and like we had a pantheon of 30 different deities, and like it was really flushed out. And now we kind of like rip pieces of that from the past and use parts of it, and kind of like change it up. So like, yeah, me and Ted were running in the same town for a while. Like we did, we both did like a 5-year campaign there. So wow. The group he was running would do something and change something, and then it would affect like the other group, or the other GM would like change it back somehow.
Yeah.
So it was awesome. Like this like GM tug of war.
Yeah, but it's very much like a living world. That is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so we both focused on like 2 different threats. Like really early on, like his game revolved around blood cultists and this demon.
Yeah.
And that ended up being the whole thing. My game took a little bit longer before like the actual villains were kind of revealed. And it was this race of Vargarians, and they basically like to hack up constructs and people and merge them together. They're basically Arcanaborg.
Wow.
So yeah, it was like a total ripoff from Star Trek.
Yeah. That's cool though.
Yeah, but their whole thing is to incorporate, other worlds and cultures into their civilization, much like the Borg, and just take everything over.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's actually sort of starting to happen in my Patreon campaign. They're like uncovering the stuff about that happened in the past.
Yeah.
I don't want to say much more about it in case any of those folks watch.
Nice. Yeah, so that was kind of fun to do. Like, and as we started like going into like the lore more and more, it turns out like these Vargarians started off, relatively normal, but there was like some calamity, and some of them were able to like escape to another world by inhabiting constructs, and others couldn't, right? But they ended up being the ones to try and like hack apart the constructs and use those to kind of survive the catastrophe. And then as the rest of the world kind of healed and went on, they started spreading out and going to different communities where people were suffering from either birth defects or injuries, and they're like, here, oh, you lost your arm in this farming accident, have another one.
Yeah,
And
I'm literally writing this down, Dave. It's like I am going to steal some of your ideas here.
But but they didn't tell them that it connected them to the rest of them, into into this hive mind, and so they like slowly just started taking over.
That's awesome.
Via just like giving out prosthetics and under the guise of helping people.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah,
that is like well, so you mentioned your pantheon had like 30 plus deities or so.
Yeah.
That was like one of the first things I did in my like first homebrew world as well, was just make like a ton of gods, and then realize like I don't even remember all of them. So the pantheon I've been running with, that is totally something that if I ever make another setting, I'm just going to use the same thing. It's like 4 gods.
Yeah.
Each of them kind of represents like part of the alignments, like lawful, chaotic, good, evil, the 4 seasons, cardinal directions. Like a lot of things happen to fall into 4, so it worked out really nicely. And one of them, the evil god, as they like kind of rose to power, and they of like our 4 elements, they represent like fire and like industry and stuff in that way. And so that is kind of like a growing threat, I guess, like in this like campaign that I'm running. But the thing is, it had basically like taken over in the past, and that's like what caused this, because they're kind of in like a post-apocalyptic world. And I have not like fully thought out like what exactly the apocalypse was like, because none of them, like there are some people who are alive in the world who would have experienced it, but like none of their characters exactly. So but yeah, so everything you just said, like the hive mind idea, like that was something I had kind of been thinking about, was like because one of them is, for example, like playing a Warforged. And so our thought was like, okay, like you are somebody who was around like before all this stuff happened, but they don't really have like memory of it, or like they get little memories like here and there. But that is something I had just recently thought about, was like that he's kind of connected to like any other Warforged, like whether or not they really know it, because right now that god is still like pretty weak. But yeah, so that's I'm totally stealing some of those ideas for like how it happened and how it spread in the first place. Like that's really cool.
Steal away. Have you had a chance to explore some other games?
Other RPGs?
Yeah.
I've played a little bit of Call of Cthulhu, and I've read a handful of other like indie RPGs. But yeah, Call of Cthulhu is the only other one that I've actually like done a session of.
So is there anything you're kind of chomping at the bit to play, or you're like still having fun with D&D?
Well, I guess, okay, this game is basically D&D, but have you heard of 5 Torches Deep?
I have heard of it, but I have not played it or checked it out yet.
Yeah, so it is almost exactly like 5e, except very simplified, which is what I really love about it. Like there are,
is that an OSR game?
I think it's technically kind of falls under OSR, yeah, because I know I first heard about it from Ben on Questing Beast, who does like tons of OSR stuff, and then I know like Professor Dungeon Master had a video about it, and I was like, all right, I need to check this game out, because it was just like a lot of what I had been wanting, I feel like, out of 5e, where yeah, it's just super simple. Like you're supposed to, it does harken back to a lot of OSR stuff where it's like rolling stats in order. There's only 4 races. It's like human, dwarf, halfling, elf, and there are some like set in stone like stats actually for them, I think. And then that kind of determines your classes as well, but not as much as like DCC, like Dungeon Crawl Classics. So there's still like a little more freedom than like some of the OSR games, I think. But the idea that like one thing I really liked is that I think there are only like four main classes, and then the subclasses kind of kind of cover all of your bases in 5e. Like there is a, I don't have it on my shelf right here, but there's like a warrior main class, and then that can kind of split into like fighter, barbarian, or like ranger, I think. So you still kind of have all the options, but I feel like it leaves a lot more room for you and the players to come up with cool abilities and features and items that they can then give to them without them being too overpowered. Because where 5e stands, it's kind of like just by all the abilities and stuff that they kind of get anyway, they're super powerful, and it's kind of hard to keep track of all that stuff. So there's not a lot of room to add in like these things that you want to create with your players. But this game seems like it's more of like a canvas for you to kind of work with. So I really want to play that. That'll like once Rime of the Frostmaiden is done, like I'm pretty much just want to run that game for a little while and see how it goes.
Yeah, there is like so many good games and just not enough time.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And also like the obstacle of learning a new rule set.
Yeah,
that's so much difficulty, but time.
Yeah, well, and that's why like for a long time I was really hooked on like, okay, the next thing I'm gonna do is Dungeon Crawl Classics because I was really into just like the aesthetic of those books. Like I love the art in those books. I love how magic is like just wild and chaotic and can have all these crazy effects. Like have you ever played or read DCC?
I have not.
Okay. I'll say that Jordan, if you know his like Forgotten Realms channel and everything,
Mm-hmm.
He has another channel that's pretty much just like about DCC because he's
I
been
didn't even
really
know he
into
had
it
another
lately.
channel.
Yeah, it's like it's really small, but
Yeah.
I've been following it lately because it's just a lot of like cool, inspiring stuff there. But the thing is that game, like, it is kind of built around 3.5, so it's already like a little bit complex, and it definitely brings in a lot of like rolling tables and stuff, like
Yeah.
old school games. Um, so ultimately, that's why I was like, this game will just take me too much time to learn. So like I still wanted to do something that's kind of OSR. And then when I found Five Torches Deep, I was like, this is it. Because
That's
this
the
just
one.
seems like something I can, the whole rule book. There's one rule book and it's 50 pages. Like you can read it in less than an hour. So it's really easy to understand the game like pretty quickly.
Yeah, I just went through Morkborg and read like I like skipped all the lore. I was interested in
the mechanics.
In the rules and how the game worked. And that's like that as well. Like it's not even a full size book. It's only it's one of the small ones, and there's lots of art and space in there, so it's like a super light read.
Yeah, and I don't is Morkborg like a D20 system?
It is. It's D20. It's very OSR.
Okay, I know it's supposed to be very like just like brutal, right? Like isn't that kind of the aesthetic of that game? It's very like hardcore.
That's exactly it. You're supposed to die. I mean, DCC's like that too. Like, I mean, people keep telling me about the funnel.
Oh yeah, honestly, that's one of the things like DCC is known for. Like that's slipped my mind, but yeah.
Yeah, like what is it? You start with like 8 characters, and none of them have levels when you start. Whoever survives is then that can become your character for the campaign or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, that's part of what initially drew me into DCC because that was one of the first things like decisions that I made when I was running my first campaign. Was like I want you guys to just start with a background, and then we'll kind of like get into your classes as we like really figure out who your characters are.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so have you what about like Dungeon World? Have you played that or run that?
I've not. So the only Powered by Apocalypse game I've played so far is Monster of the Week.
Okay.
And I think Ted's played Dungeon World.
Okay.
But I do love the Powered by Apocalypse engine from what I've seen of it so far. It's so simple, right? Like making characters are so easy. I don't know if you've seen the playbooks.
Only so I haven't actually read Dungeon World. The only reason I brought this up because like pre-chat we mentioned Powered by the Apocalypse for a minute.
Yeah.
But the one game that I have not read fully because I don't even know if the whole game is out yet. But I have like a quick start guide for a game called Root. It's like little like woodland creatures are kind of like the races and
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
But it uses Powered by the Apocalypse, so I'm like vaguely familiar with like the playbooks and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's great about it is like roll 2d6 and like the number
Yeah,
ranges are all the same. Like, you know, if you fail,
yeah,
succeed, there's a consequence. But also, like, when I played my first game of Monster of the Week, at first I was like, oh, I don't know how to make characters in this game yet. And then I looked at the playbooks. I was like, oh, literally follow the instructions, right? Because
right.
it's like you only have like a certain number of choices to make. So
Yeah,
it's super simple. It's
yeah, that's the thing. It almost feels more like a bridge between like board games and an RPG because like so much of it is kind of laid out for you, but there's still a lot of room for imagination. I don't know.
yeah,
Like I want to dig into that system more myself,
it's
but
definitely.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it's definitely a better system to teach RPGs to new
yeah,
people than say I don't know D&D. Um,
yeah,
like because D&D, there's nothing simple about it.
yeah. Well, I think you know, and we had briefly mentioned this as well. I think this is before the chat started. How I wanted to do a video about how D&D, like at least 5e, like isn't really as easy as everybody says.
Yeah,
Um, and like the way I think about it is like yes, like once you get down, okay, I roll the big round one and add like one of the numbers on my sheet that the DM tells me to add. Like you pretty much know how to play D&D, but like outside of that, D&D does have so much that you are expected to learn that does make it way more complex than most people like say it is. Like
for
yeah,
for a new player, and like I just recently played with a new player just this past week,
yeah,
and like they're always looking at their sheet and they're like, well, what do I roll? Because you got your sheet with all these different things on it, and then you
yeah,
got like these 7 different dice in front of you.
yeah,
And I'm kind of like, well, generally you're just going to roll that d20, right?
yeah,
And then very rarely will you roll something else first,
yeah,
and then we can figure things out from there. But still, like it's like that's an easy concept, but when you're the person and looking at the sheet with all this information on it, and you've
yeah,
got all these different dice. And
yeah.
then, like, even like you're just like they're the D20, and they might be like, which one was that again?
Right.
So,
Yeah, I think that's part of it is like even as a somewhat, you know, as a more experienced players run into that where then you kind of like built your character a certain way and then if you can't do like the few things that you're like really good at, you feel like, oh, like I can't, you know, you're just looking at the character sheet and you're like, oh, like there's nothing I can do here. Like you
yeah.
get really locked into what's on the sheet. Whereas I think there are other systems that are definitely better at like making it more intuitive how the game is really supposed to be about you just come up with a solution and then the DM tells you how to make it happen.
I feel like playing other games are sometimes harder because you learn D&D first,
Yeah.
right? Like, Monster of the Week, that comes up a lot where it's like, well, what do I need to roll for this? And it's like, and you only ask that because it's like a D&D mindset where
Right.
it's just like really simple and you're just like, no, you don't actually have to read it, roll. You don't really need to roll anything, right? Like the person running the game, the keeper, is just going to give you the information where you don't have it. It's like one of the other. Where in
Yeah.
D&D, you're always like doing all these like lore checks, and
Yeah.
it's just like I think like we have all this extra information in our head, this extra baggage.
Yeah. That's honestly like a great way to think about it. Is like D&D probably does make it a little bit harder to like learn your next RPG. But then I feel like now that I have read, like I've read a strong amount of Call of Cthulhu. Not that I've remembered it all, but I've read a
Yeah,
lot and like yeah, read some of these other like indie games and things. I think I have a much better idea now of like, you know, just what's out there and like how they can work instead of D&D, which is very mechanical compared to a lot of games.
well, yeah, I mean, and if you've been playing D&D for a while, like that other stuff
Yeah.
is a lot easier to pick up
Yeah.
because it's like so much less. I mean, there's also like a lot of really great like 1-page RPGs
Oh
out
yeah.
there.
Yeah, yeah.
So as I get older, the more I crave like simpler systems.
Yeah. Well, and especially, yeah, like if you just want to branch out and like do something new, um, it's just like you said, it's like the amount of time you have to invest to like learn a game like D&D. Well, there are other games that are a lot quicker to learn, and then you can just start playing and having fun faster than you would with another game like D&D. So
Yeah, I feel like Powered by Apocalypse is like you'd hand someone a playbook and be like, fill this out and then we play. Or you like D&D is like, here, read this 400-page book and we'll be ready to go.
Yeah. I think one of the like ways that I realized that D&D is like a lot more complicated than I thought was when like one of the first times that I introduced people to the game, because we started by making characters and I tried to be, very accommodating about it. Like, okay, like, here's like all the races you can choose, here's these classes and like, well, this one's kind of good at this, but really it should have just been like, what kind of character do you have in mind? And then I'll just like tell you which ones kind of fit that image. Because there's so like, I was just flooding them with options and then we're like filling out all these things on the sheet. And it just seems like it took a really long time, right? Like it's really overwhelming. Yeah,
for sure. So do you prefer being a player or a GM?
That's tough. I think like if I had to choose, I feel like I would have to say DM, because ultimately I like, kind of creating the world and everything. But I really like doing a mix of both. I've been just DMing for a while though.
Yeah, I'm kind of the mindset that I always like to be doing the one I'm not doing at the time.
That's it. That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
Like when I'm playing, I want to be running, and when I'm running, I want to play.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, because it's like then when you're running, you can come up with all these cool like character ideas and have no chance to live them out. But then if you're playing, I'll often get inspired by like something a DM does and be like, oh, like and then just want to incorporate that into a game that I'm running. But yeah.
Are you have you gotten into like the con scene? I mean, obviously the last year or so, no one's been, but prior to that?
No, this is a funny thing to mention. My first con was gonna be Nerdarchy Con. Yeah, because there was the one, I think it was like PAX Unplugged happened kind of shortly, or maybe a couple months to a year after I had moved to Maryland, where I am now.
Yeah.
And had I known about that earlier, I probably would have gone to that. But then that was kind of the last like big one, I think, before things started kind of shutting down that I know of. I don't know. I'm not like too into the scene, so I don't really know what else out there, but yeah, I want to be.
It's a lot of fun. PAX Unplugged's a really good con. And it'll probably be like, there's a good chance it'll be the first one we really go back to. Although I'm thinking about driving out to Gen Con. Just like, I've just been cooped up too long and I'm like, we're all vaccinated.
Yeah.
I think it'll be fine. Well,
that's the thing, right? I think because PAX is just in Philly, right? And
Gen Con that one's super local for us.
Yeah, and Gen Con's in Wisconsin. Is that right?
No. It's in Indianapolis.
Okay.
Wisconsin's Gamehole Con.
Okay.
Also a really fun convention. So there's unfortunately Nerdarchy Con is on indefinite hiatus until we figure out what's going on. And even if things open, even though things are opening up, to really have it launched this year, we would have been having to work on it and planning it.
Yeah.
At the very beginning of the year, and things were just way too uncertain then.
Right.
And with it being like our first year doing a con, we were advised, well, let some other folks go first and see how it works out.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great point. Like there's no rush at the end of the day. Like it's going to happen at some point and it'll be great when it happens. And honestly, like the more time you have to plan it and really make sure things are in place the right way, it'll turn out better. So.
Yeah. So the funny thing is like we all like are kind of like building these businesses, YouTube channels that are based off of someone else's product. So like our thing was like, well, maybe we should do our own thing that isn't so dependent on what another company does.
Yeah. And that's a great point.
So our big move was like, we know an event company. And we started like formulating that at the end of 2019 and really started getting going in the beginning of 2020. And then like we wrote out a huge check for the space, and then everything shut down. I'm like, no, maybe it wasn't a great idea after all.
Yeah. That's the same reason I'm glad Grace and I didn't get engaged until just before things started shutting down. If we had
Yeah,
done it
so
earlier, we would have been further into like planning all of it, and then realized like we can't do any of this.
yeah. That
So,
sometimes you're lucky that way, you know.
yeah.
But you know, now you guys will be able. Now you guys have more time to plan and figure it out.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Looking at it the same way.
we are just at the hour mark here. Final thoughts?
Oh, I mean, it's just been great chatting with you, and it was fun to answer some questions. Yeah, I'm thankful you invited me here. This is great.
I appreciate you coming on. It's been great to track down Ted's missing missing son.
Yeah, I can't believe that. I don't know if that actually came up in this chat, but yeah.
I did see it, but someone sent me a picture of you, and they're like, I found Nerdarchist Ted's long lost son."
Yeah.
which I thought that was pretty funny. And you know, if Ted had a kid at like 14, you could have been his child. So
I won't tell anybody.
yeah. So with that, until next time, everyone, stay nerdy.